Okay, so Isaiah 28 and Psalm 2 have a lot to do with each other. Psalm 2 is talking about sin in general as a foundation of understanding sin. And so when we get into specific things about sin, such as Isaiah 28, which is related to the Ephesians level, and addiction, that of course is going to relate to Psalm 2, which is the foundation of understanding sin. There's also a connection with idolatry. Idolatry is mentioned at the end of 1 John as a summary of all of the different sins. And so idolatry is where you are putting something else ahead of a God. And when you sin, you are obeying something else and not obeying God. And that puts that ahead of God. Addiction is especially like that because addiction is where you are obeying an urge, right? Sin is also a trespass. A trespass is where you go onto someone else's property. And in the Bible, it's used exactly that way. It refers to us doing something that God is supposed to be doing. So, for example, when we want to be rulers, as Psalm 2 talks about, or judges, that's God's job. God is supposed to be ruling us. We're not supposed to be ruling ourselves. So that's a trespass. And God is the one who judges as to what is right and wrong. And that is based on his Torah, right? And we are supposed to study his Torah. We're not supposed to make up our own rules of what is right and wrong. That is a trespass. Now, in the Levitical offerings that you see in the first 6 chapters of Leviticus, one of those offerings is called the trespass offering. And it is unique in that you not only have to do the sacrifice for forgiveness, but you also have to do restitution. Why? Because you have trespassed upon someone else. Now, this can be another human being. If you steal something, for example, then you have to restore that plus some for the inconvenience, right? And and so that's a trespass offering plus restitution. It's the same with God. If you trespass against God, you have to get your sin forgiven, but you also have to pay restitution. And this is where our vow comes in, our covenant with God is to do everything that he tells us to do. Why? Well, we belong to him for 2 reasons. One is that he has created us, but the other one is that he has redeemed us. The redemption means that he has paid the penalty that you're supposed to pay for your trespass. So when we sinned, we did things that belong to God. As a result, we have to pay restitution. Restitution is what? Well, restitution is primarily death. Okay? The penalty of sin is death, right? So we broke the covenant with him, and the information about how what happens to you when you break the covenant is that you die. And death refers to separation from God and also separation from your physical body, which means that you die physically in addition to dying spiritually. So by Yeshua taking on that restitution, then we are indebted to him as a slave. Okay, and so this is discussed right after the Ten Commandments in Exodus 21. So so what happens is that when you become a slave to God, you have to do everything that he tells you to do, and he has to provide everything you need to do that. That's a slave, okay? And we are a slave because Yeshua paid our restitution for us because we couldn't, okay? And as a result, we are now indebted to him as a slave. So in Isaiah 28, it's talking about the idea of addiction in particular being a problem because of the fact that it causes us to trespass. That pull upon us makes us do something according to another god, and that god is whatever you're addicted to. And it causes us to trespass against what belongs to God, which is his rules, his judgment. Okay, the reason that I connected these two passages, actually, is because I heard a sermon decades ago from a guy who was doing an advanced little study that he had discovered in the Bible, and he used these two passages. And what he was saying was that let's look at Psalm 2. In Psalm 2, why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. So the bonds is talking about the fact that we're supposed to do what God tells us to do. And so what he was saying was that the angels, when they got ready to fall, the 1/3 of the angels that were going to go away from God, they decided that they wanted to break that bond with God and no longer do what he's telling you to do in the Torah. Okay? The cords is very interesting. The cords is always used as a connection between God and human beings. Remember I said that there's you've got righteousness and then you've got a mixture. You cannot have pure evil. If you have pure evil, you would just snuff out of existence. Why? Because life comes from God. He's the creator. He creates life. And so if you are alive, even if you are a horrible person, you could be Hitler. If you are alive, then that means that that life is a cord that is coming to you from God. So you still have a connection to God. So when we lose our connection to God, we don't lose it completely. If we did, we would snuff out of existence. We lose it partially. So in other words, we can't hear his voice. We don't consider him. We don't have an ear open to him. Okay, these parts of our connection with God are broken, but the life itself is not broken because we're still alive. And that goes back to dying, you shall die, right? In other words, when you die spiritually, that causes physical death, right? And so but that doesn't happen immediately. The spiritual death happens immediately, but the physical death happens later on. Why? Because you have life, but you don't have all the other good things that you need from God. And that causes you to die physically. It also causes you to die ultimately, meaning that you go to the lake of fire, right? When you go to the lake of fire, that is a spiritual death, meaning that you don't have a spiritual connection to God. And does that mean that you no longer exist? Well, there's a lot of passages that say that you snuff out of existence at that point, because your connection with God is completely gone. And of course, there's a lot of passages that talk about you burning in hell forever. So how those two fit together, we don't know exactly, because it's not important. The Bible is written for us here on the earth, alive. The stuff that happens after death, a little bit sketchy. We know that it's bad. Okay, we know that if you go to hell, that's bad. And that's all we need to know right now. Okay, so, but they are saying in verse 3, in Psalm 2, verse 3, they're saying that they're going to break the cords. In other words, every connection between them and God they want to break. Now, if they did that, they would snuff out of existence. So they are thinking that they can exist apart from God helping them to exist, okay? Which is not true. It's a lie, which is going to be important here shortly, okay? And then it comes into this stuff about Messiah. I have set my king on my holy hill Zion. Okay, the word set is not your normal word for set. It means poured. Okay, and that's going to be important here shortly. Okay, and so he's talking a lot about Messiah here in the end of the chapter, verse 12. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Happy are those who take refuge in him. So in other words, we were with God, we broke away from God, but we still have a little bit of a connection, even though we deny that we have that connection. And then God comes in with his storm. The storm and the vomit come together as a perfect storm. And that's a shocking storm to get you out of your addiction to whatever it is that's keeping you away from God. And when that happens, that is designed to be shocking so that you will repent. Because God is love. God doesn't want you to go to the lake of fire. He wants you to live with him forever. Okay? And so he is providing this storm in order to help you to make the decision to get out of your addiction and get the help from the congregation that you need. Okay, so so the Son is offering you to be a refuge. So when he attacks, then you still have a choice at that point. Are you going to repent and come into the refuge of Messiah, or are you going to continue to fight against God, and the flood is going to wipe you out eventually? Okay. Now let's go back to Isaiah 28. In Isaiah 28, okay, go down to verse 15. Because you have said, We have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement with the overflowing scourge. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hidden ourselves. So you see the connection here. They're saying that there's going to be a flood. Okay, well, why are they saying that? Well, what they're doing is they're talking about rebelling against God, right? And so they figure that if they do that, then God's going to be angry and he's going to punish them, right? With some major punishment like a flood, right? And so they assume that that's going to happen. So in their decision to go away from God, they also had to consider, is this something that we can get away with? Is there some way that we can survive this? And they come up with the idea that if we went to a place where there was sin, then God, who is 100% righteousness, would not be able to go in there. He cannot be tainted by sin. He can't be associated with it, and therefore he can't get in to attack us. So they say, yeah, we can survive this thing. Okay? So they come up with this covenant with death. Death is a place of separation from God, and they're going to put lies in this place, which is sin, in order to protect themselves from the flood that is going to come from God when he gets mad at them for breaking away. But then, verse 16, he goes into Messiah. Why? Why is Messiah so prominent in this discussion about addiction and sin? Therefore, thus the Lord says the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. And hastily is very important. One of the reasons that that people go away from God is that they think that they can fix the situation faster than God can fix it. You know, God he takes eons to do anything, right? So I can come in as a teenager and fix the whole world just by saying this that God didn't think about, right? And of course, we say that and do that, and whatever it is we think is going to fix the world, and it doesn't work, and by the time you're 40, you kind of give up on it, right? And that's just a common thing that humans do, right? Because they want a quick solution. They don't want to wait on God. But we have to wait on God because God's plan is perfect. Our plan is not. And our plan is the addiction. Okay, verse 17, also I will make justice or judgment the measuring line and righteousness the plummet. The hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the hiding place. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand when the overflowing scourge passes through. Then you shall be trampled down by it. As often as it goes out, it will take you or hit you. For morning by morning it will pass over you, and by day and by night it will be a terror just to understand the report. So what he's saying is that Messiah, as a human being, can come into this place where there's sin. He can take on the sin, die for the sins, and he can be associated with mankind in order to get into this place. And when he does, he's bringing this flood, this storm. Okay, so God can do things here in this world through Messiah. And how does he do that? He does it through the Spirit of Messiah. The Spirit of Messiah is what gives us the revelation about our addiction. The Spirit of Messiah is the one who can break through the defense mechanisms. The Spirit of Messiah is the one who causes the storm to hit. The Spirit of Messiah is the one who does this whole thing, and he times it with your vomit. When you get to the place where you are messing up so badly that it's causing problems in your life, that's when he releases the storm. That's when he releases the flood. And this flood is going to be like a tidal wave that's going to come in day after day after day. In verse 20, for the bed is too short to stretch out on, the covering too narrow that one can wrap himself into. So this is something that keeps hitting you over and over and over. You are reminded of it until you let go of it, okay, and come to God as a refuge. So, another very interesting connection is the idea of the flood. He's talking about the flood. He's talking about pouring Messiah into the world as a flood, okay, in Psalm 2. But there was a flood in Noah's day, and this was a physical flood that killed the people physically. And when that happened, he decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the righteous people over here and I'm going to save them. And then I'm going to get rid of all of the evil people. And then everything's going to be hunky-dory, right? And of course it was not. Because within 3 generations, you had the Tower of Babel. And the whole world was filled with violence again. Why? Because it didn't fix the stuff in the head. It didn't fix the soul. Without fixing the soul, it's not going to work. Okay? So the flood that we're talking about here is a different kind of flood. He's not going to destroy the world with a physical flood. He's going to destroy the mind, the addiction, with a spiritual flood. And this stuff that we're talking about here in Isaiah 28 is how he does that. Another interesting connection is Revelation 12. I'm going to read this thing. You're not going to believe it unless you read it. In Revelation 12, he's talking about the dragon. The dragon is a word for Satan, right? Okay, so Revelation 12. We'll go down to verse 13. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, again, we're talking about the angels falling and getting away from God, which is what we're talking about here, where we're talking about this flood, right? So it's the same context. He persecuted the woman. The woman is referring to Israel. That's us. Okay? Who gave birth to the male child. That's Messiah. Again, the context is talking about Messiah very pointedly. Okay? But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now everybody gets all wrapped around on the time period here, right? Because it's mentioned. But that's not important, okay? What is important is the principle here, okay? Because this is talking about this same Isaiah 28 addiction stuff. The flood that comes in and hits us in order to get rid of our addiction. It's the same principle that we're talking about here. And you'll notice that there is a refuge that this woman goes to. Okay? Which is what Psalm 2 talked about. When the storm hits, come into Messiah for a refuge. So she comes into Messiah as a refuge. And so now remember, Revelation is talking about future events. So up until that point, there's a whole bunch of Israel people who have the addiction, and they die with the addiction, and they go to the lake of fire eventually. Okay? But at the end, when everything runs amok completely, all of Israel is going to be saved. Right? Read that in Romans 11. And what happens there is that Israel decides to go to the refuge, which is Messiah. Messiah is the flood, and he is the refuge. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood. Here's the flood, and who is doing this? Not Messiah, the serpent, the dragon. Okay? That Satan is doing this. So now we have a little bit of a difference that we need to work out. So the serpent spewed out water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth, or the land, opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. The dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua Messiah. So when we get hit by the flood that is coming from Yeshua, right at the time when the vomit is at its max, there is another flood that happens. And that is the temptation from the evil side to just drown in the flood. Just go with it. Don't fight it. Just die. That's what's going on. So when this stuff is hitting, and we are aware of our addiction, there's going to be another flood that is going to tempt us towards that addiction, to stay with that addiction. Okay? And what is that? That's the defense mechanisms. The defense mechanisms are going to go nuts when all this happens, because they're trying to keep that place. They consider that thing that they're protecting to be protecting you. And they don't understand the full picture, because they were put into place by a little kid. When you were a little kid, you put that into place. When you had a little trauma as a little kid, you put that defense mechanism into place in your subconscious in order to protect that particular way of coping with the problem. And then as you have more problems and more problems, right, then you are going to continue to build up more injury, because you keep on reacting to this stuff, and you have defense mechanisms that push you towards the addiction, so that you no longer are thinking about the problem, so that you stop injuring yourself. So that addiction becomes a good thing in the mind of the subconscious place that it's protecting. But that doesn't really fix the problem, because it just postpones the inevitable. The inevitable is that this thing is going to kill you. Okay? And so postponing it is not going to work. From a little kid's standpoint, postponing it would work, because as a little kid, you're going to live forever, right? But that's not reality. But God can fix the trauma within the soul, but you have to let Him in. You have to get Him as your refuge. So all of this stuff works together. So when the angels fell away from God, decided to go away from God, when Adam decided to go away from God, when we as believers decide to sin and go away from God, okay, all those things are the same. And we do this because we are tempted by an addiction. And the flood is going to come in. That is Messiah, and His Spirit is going to come in and arouse us to the reality that we need help. And so that help is going to come in from the Torah. It's going to come in from the congregation. Okay, it's going to come in from the Spirit of God, and it's going to come from the path. Those are our four resources. And basically what we're talking about is we're talking about doing a lot of work on this. We're going to use the prayer worksheet on the addiction, and we're going to keep going after it until we work around, identify all of the defense mechanisms and work around each one of them, and eventually get to that core that is that protected area, so that we can change it and say, hey, what we really want to protect is being with God and changing, so that instead of being pulled towards sin, we're going to be pulled towards righteousness. So the angelic conflict is all about the same thing. We humans are all about the same thing. Israel, unbelievers, all of us are dealing with this same conglomeration, and the flood is going to come in and give all of us an opportunity to come back to God. And we are going to either scoff at that opportunity and continue into the addictions, or we're going to say, hey, this addiction is going to kill me. It's going to destroy my family. It's going to make a mess out of things. It's not going to work. God is my refuge. I'm going to make a decision to get out of that and get all of the help that I need to get out of that. Okay. Well, that's the connection between Isaiah 28 and Psalm 2.